Thank you all for being here. I just wanted one little correction, if I may. Michael Chubb with YVR. He leads the Innovation Initiative as well as Director of Finance for the Vancouver Airport. Raj, we haven't had the opportunity to introduce in your schedule, but thank you for being here representing HDR. And as it turned out, we had Jason from the Integral Group, and I can speak to working with the organization, never with Jason, but very collaborative and small world as it turns out to be fully open and transparent. Integral and YVR are working together on some initiatives in this very topic. I didn't know it at the time as we were inviting people to come together. When we think about collaboration, we also have to include the supply chain. Let us go up to the global thought leaders, people that are pushing the boundaries in every way, and it's through that capacity that met David, and so thank you, David, for being here. And a bit of continuity from this morning, we've got Peter, who's talked very much about collaboration, and then Helen, obviously. Thank you, by the way. I really appreciated that. Prepared some questions that we may go through, but I think just a bit of free flow. We're talking about change. Collaboration. It's a great buzzword. Most times it's a token of collaboration, as Helen so eloquently stated. So if in change management, step one, it's to establish a sense of urgency. So let me play, I think it's Lilia, that question. I love it. Sense of urgency is only going to come if we see a better way, if there's an opportunity to drive better results, better outcomes. Our minister spoke of building performance, driving design, not design and construction driving what a building performs as. So I'm going to just rapid fire, and I'd like to just go down this way. The question to our panel. Considering building performance, considering design, construction, what would better outcomes mean to you? Just off the cuff. Helen. Better outcomes. Just you personally. I know it's very broad, but we're going to go somewhere with this.
Better profitability.
Profitability. Peter.
Better owner satisfaction.
I think we've heard it. Faster, cheaper, greener.
Thank you.
Michael? Already stealing all my finance results. Definitely comes down to the numbers and full cycle life costing.
Thank you.
To me, it's more of an integrated approach than just not looking at this so siloed.
Better user experience.
What a great example. Some of these folks have never met before. What does outcomes mean? We've got to establish common language. Even yesterday with some people in the BIM community, we were together, and many never focus on the financial. I think there was a common thread here. Michael, at the end of the day, as an end client, I'm a very large landlord, I might add, and a growing landlord. Do you ever see projects go ahead where finance isn't a key decision criteria?
Historically, we'd focused more on the upfront cost and build it and then deal with the consequences afterwards. And part of the new sustainability initiatives that we're really focused on is really putting the financial pillar of sustainability up front and looking at the total life cycle costs and slowing down, spending more money on the planning phases in the early stages so that we know what the end result's going to be once the project is finished, and we know what the costs are going to be, and hopefully it'll be lower at the end of the day.
Right on. So that would be a change from a traditional approach within your business?
Definitely, and I think it's looking at the sustainability model that we've been using. We've adopted the sustainability case document that we look at every project through that lens before we get into the detailed design.
Right.
I think we often had in our head what the end project was going to be and jumped to that. And now we're taking a step back and talking to our stakeholders, and not just on an environmental sustainability, on a financial sustainability, on a social sustainability, from a governance perspective, to look at, have we considered all angles? Are we actually doing the right project? Are we focusing on the right areas? Have we considered everyone's viewpoints? And then going into the detailed design after we've gone through that exercise.
Excellent, thank you. Raj, if I may ask, just to follow through on that with Michael, your experience dealing with clients as they're navigating this change, how is that impacting your business?
So on the consulting side for us, it's an interesting way we look at projects. We have clients, fortunately like Mike, right? Yeah. Mike over here, who are progressive. And then on the flip side of it, we also have clients that are not as progressive. So trying to build that change or trying to implement that change with a value proposition that isn't dollars and cents related, it's a little bit more difficult. So, I mean, it runs the gamut from one end to the other. But what we are seeing is a shift in the thought process, if you will. And I really enjoyed Helen's presentation on the attraction of the millennials, because I think our clients are also thinking about that. Is the next generation that's coming in, they're not typically about the dollars and cents right off the bat. They're more about doing the right thing, you know, and being able to make a difference in the world, and then leveraging cool technology, if you will, to do it.
Right. From your side, Jason, is there anything you might add to that to dovetail in from a consulting point of view?
No, I think that actually really captures it. And we've actually been fortunate enough in the aviation world that we deal with large facilities, so we actually tend to see them as very risk adverse, but more innovative clients in that they are looking at different ways than just the first capital cost. How does this actually affect us from a long-term maintenance standpoint? And that was actually, just speaking directly to YVR, that was a big shift we saw at YVR when they started thinking about what is this more than just our first capital cost? What is this more than just how much we're going to spend on this one project? What does this mean further on down the line from a just a sustainable business standpoint? So,
Sounds to me like it really is evolving a collaborative process that's maturing. How does that tie in, David, if I may, to you, from a supply chain? You know what I realized, everybody? We didn't even do the formal introductions, but we're just going to keep going free flow. But David represents the Lafarge Wholesome organization in quite a senior capacity and has worked around the world, so he's bringing some other global perspectives. But David, we listen to the design community, we listen to a sophisticated end user, if I may, Michael, talk about this approach. How up the stream, up the supply chain, this notion of collaborative teams, how would you describe the impact to your business today compared to even 5 years ago?
Maybe I'll speak to what we see as the issue
Yes.
right now. And it's really, you have a sustainability group at the YVR. You have an engineering group at the YVR. They have a procurement group at the YVR. They all, at the highest level, agree, but when they get into the details, they don't align. There's a clash. And to me, you know, why I'm interested in BIM is bringing those three groups together. We talk about being quantifiable, et cetera, but the first step is to bring the sustainability group and the engineering group together, because there's some really easy things to do right off the bat, just by bringing those two together. So.
Yeah, and I think when we look at stakeholders, we often look externally as to who the parties we need to engage with are. But in a large organization, the silos exist, absolutely. And that is a challenge that you try and break down these silos, but it's definitely a challenge, for sure.
The hobby horse I've been banging forever, and I know Clint's been hearing me do this, is very simple stuff, recycled asphalt pavement. Right now, we can put 30, 40, 50% in the roads. Right now, the spec's 20%. Groups in cities in the lower mainland are down at 10%. And they're there because their engineering groups tell them they can't use it. And they can't use it because they're not measuring, testing properly. So you talk to the people at the highest level, they can't believe it, that this is happening. You know, you look at something like concrete rubble, and how you measure that? Well, it's not counted towards recycling to your zero waste goals. And there's some very easy metrics and connections, just taking the three pieces and putting them together.
So I'm just going to tie a few points here from the minister this morning. He's got about 1,800 buildings in his portfolio. He speaks of creating an environment for change. Peter, working at Allied, even your own organization. BMW, a climate for change. YVR, same thing. Would you describe with your own company at Lafarge or at Sweeney & Co. or at HDR, any of you, and I just want to open it up, just roundtable. In your organization or your key client's organization like YVR, Do you see where the whole organization is engaging to come together, to collaborate, to navigate this change? I mean, we all talk about change management, right? And yeah, we're talking high level, everybody. Yes, we can be in BIM, but it's a tool, not data, but information, knocking the silos down. So I believe that this change management is a critical success factor. So I just want to play on this a bit. Do you see in your organizations that there's a disciplined focus to creating an environment for change? Is there a guiding vision on how to do buildings better, on how we use BIM better? Just open it up, roundtable.
I'll go first.
Please.
For us at HDR, it's at the core of who we are, and it's not just me saying that because it's a company tagline or anything like that. But if you think about how we're organized in a matrix environment, and that's by design. Because when you're in a matrix environment, you can't be in a silo, because you have to go through as you start out with HDR, it seems like a pain, because it's like, oh my God, I have to work through the matrix in order to get something done. But when you get to it, you really understand the value of it, because now you've got connection points across the organization, which allows us to think in an integrated fashion. That's number one. And number two, what I would say is, so my role within the company is knowledge and applied technologies. And the idea being that at the end of the day, clients like YVR, we don't necessarily provide a widget to them. They look for our expertise, and they look for the credibility that we build with our clients at the end of the project, really. And so for us to get to that, you have to have a knowledge strategy that actually, at the core of a knowledge strategy is what? Is communities of practice, it's collaboration. And so that's part of who we are as a company, and that's how we approach our projects, and that's how we look at leveraging our collective knowledge to help clients. And frankly, at the end of the day, help our communities as well.
Thank you. Others? Keen? Helen, perfect.
So one of the things that we've heard through all of the various stakeholder research that we've done is, from the owner's perspective, there is a fatigue setting in terms of the performance gap between what is promised and what is then delivered. And, you know, it seems like it's a perpetual story of disappointment, where we have projects that are designed to be LEED Gold, and their energy performance is probably no better than a building code building. And what happens is that despite clients having very sort of aspirational environmental goals and vision statements, when it comes to the specific project, it always resorts back very quickly to best effort. So we'll make our best possible effort to make it as energy efficient as possible. And after the value engineering process, the best effort is basically building code. And that, I think, is where this digital supply chain, end to end, has a really powerful role to play, is that we really are closing that predicted to actual performance gap. And we can demonstrate that, and we can, I'm not going to say the word guarantee, but we are going to get very close. Our clients are going to be happier as a result. And if we can deal with that, then I think we're able to sell this technology.
Well, I think that's part of what is driving the government mandate in UK to have this information that's in the BIM model flow through to be usable by the operators. Is they see the value of that as allowing them to control what they're given in the end. Because in our experience, a big part of the failure that you're talking about is in the operations not being done properly to suit the design. You know, the operations people will say, oh, our energy is for the cooling plant is through the roof, and then you discover they've left it on all day long because there's one computer room that needed some cooling. So they're not operating what was designed to be a very efficient system effectively. And part of that is education. But with the feedback that you would get from a more sophisticated monitoring system to give you the feedback about how the building is actually performing, it's not obvious to someone who's not, you know, at all aware of how the system is designed. So, I mean, this is touching on stuff we were talking about yesterday. There's a lot of value there that should, if it could, flow through to the operators that ultimately will see I think, the promise proven for the buildings that we're designing.
Michael?
I think it comes largely from tone at the top as well, and you get what you measure. So
Yes.
a key thing is setting the performance expectations, having some KPIs that are clear to everybody, and then changing management's compensation structure to reflect those. And it's amazing when you do measure specific targets and people have their bonuses on the line, how those are suddenly achieved instead of other things. But, you know, it's a balanced scorecard approach as well, that you can't focus on just one thing. It's making sure that you kind of hit the full gamut of all the areas.
Balanced scorecard, you're bringing a number of stakeholders together then.
Oh, yeah, completely.
So it's not just we need design and go build a building. You're talking total
Well, and I think
organizational
it's
engagement.
back to our look at sustainability, and historically, you know, sustainability was an environmental buzzword, but it's so much more than that.
So much more.
Sustainability is much broader.
Yes.
And if you just look at it through an environmental lens, you'll miss so much more than that. So, or if you just look at it through a financial lens, you'll miss a lot. So you have to look at all the pillars and then figure out what the KPIs are and how best to measure them.
Dave just played, Jason, he's chomping at the bit here.
What I was going to say is what gets measured gets done. And that's a good thing. That can be a bad thing. And I think LEED is a good example, perhaps, of what gets measured gets done. And it's not always a good the outcome you'd wished. But I think BIM, it's about having an agreed-to collaborative platform with a common language that stops some of the gaming from happening. And I think for us, as being involved in the supply chain, being contractors, that's the key thing. If we can have that agreed-to scorecard that's common, it can help us move it forward.
Well, and just to layer on that, I mean, it's really speaking to having everybody at the table in the beginning. It's, if you just have in the beginning an owner and a designer, you're not going to have a collaborative process. You need to have everybody at the table in the beginning, and you need to actually have conversations about what is our end goal, what is our end vision. You talk about facilities maintenance and actually utilizing BIM for that. It means your designers have to build your, you know, for instance, your Revit model the right way to be able to even take that information in the first place. It means you need to have an owner that understands what they're getting from the facilities maintenance side. You need to have a contractor who's then going to be able to take a 3D model that's been produced by a designer and feed more information into that, actually turn that into something. And really, in my experience, the only time where I've actually seen that collaborative approach come together is, and for all its misgivings, is the P3 environment. And P3 environment allows who's actually going to own and operate the building for, you know, whatever that contract is, whether it's 30 years or whatever it is. You can have everybody together at that table talking the same language, talking about what is the deliverable in the end, what are we trying to drive to. So,
Are we speaking about a procurement process then really being an enabler versus inhibitor? Back to Helen's earlier message?
no, exactly, and that's, I think in the traditional design bid build world, it's very difficult to break out of a siloed mentality. You have to have, you know, specific projects where you just have the entire team commit in order for a design bid build project to work in a collaborative way. The traditional way is really just to be siloed, and even when we talk on the design side about being collaborative, a lot of times we just mean about being collaborative between the architects, the electrical engineer, the mechanical engineer, and the structural. That's not a collaborative environment, that's still a siloed environment, even though you're allowing for more collaborative 3D design to be put together. That 3D design isn't BIM, and it's not really going to give you the end product that's going to help people. So,
You touched on balanced scorecard earlier. I'd tie it back to the original question when we first just all came up here and I asked just individually, define results, better outcomes. Totally different. Go to balanced scorecard, right? Everybody's got a different definition. Do you today see, an open question to the table, everybody getting together and defining what those KPIs are at the start of a project? Would you say that's the norm today, whether you're an engineer, an M&E, or an architect, or supply chain, or contractor? Are we having those discussions today?
We are. We're perhaps not choosing the right KPIs, I think. And so the outcome comes down to the lowest initial cost.
How much do you cost, David?
Yeah, it's clear. I think that's what we're talking about changing.
Exactly. Okay.
Well, something Michael actually touched on was the sustainability case document that YVR implemented about 3 years ago. And I had the privilege of working with YVR on their first SCD. And from the design aspect, you could see actually it was starting to change actually what the KPIs were going to be in the beginning. We didn't just talk about what the first cost and what the basic design was. We actually cost about how does this roll out over the next 30 years? How are we actually thinking about what we're implementing here?
Right.
And there wasn't the traditional sort of what we think of as BIM inside of that, but we did think about overall collaboration and
Nice.
the KPIs. So.
With Raj?
Just a couple quick points. I mean, as long as BIM is looked upon as, say, Revit or MicroStation, I mean, as long as we look at BIM as a technology, as a tool, the concept that it truly stands behind, at least the way I see it, is it's a philosophy. It's a philosophy. It's a collaboration philosophy. I think that's a mindset. That's a change I think we need to look at within the industry is number one. And number two, it's actually moving away from or having BIM not as an add-on on a contract or an RFP. It's not a, hey, this is a value-added, different thing we do for you. It's, you got to do it. That this is just how we do business. This is our industry's DNA. Once that happens, I believe it will create the value of collaboration that it's truly intended for.
When we saw earlier today some of the metrics up from the UK, we don't need policy or some regulation that says we got to do it. If you're going to save 50% cycle time, I mean, get to rent checks faster, you're going to produce faster, right? If we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 30 to 50%, I mean, these seem to me as, these are catalysts for change. Are we seeing that come out, though, on the day-to-day and the construction side, Helen or Peter? I'd like to, I mean...
Well, certainly the UK saw it. And what was the other interesting thing that I didn't mention was after those metrics were put in place, the government then was able to see how to strategically invest in innovation and put in £160 million in the next 6 months after that document came out. Because they finally were able to see that when we talk about innovation in the construction industry, those are the outputs that we are going to be able to generate. And I think as a catalyst for change, it was not only within businesses and design and construction firms, but it was as an industry as a whole. And so I think we are seeing some of those industry metrics starting to come along. So the province with its new step code is now transitioning to away from the smoke and mirrors of ASHRAE, which was a percentage improvement over an arbitrary, depending on how you do it, arbitrary baseline. It's going to be thermal energy demand intensity. And you're going to have to be able to nail those performance criteria, 3.5 air changes an hour, any kind of building. So you need to be able to deliver those measurable outcomes in the projects, and I think that's going to have people waking up.
Peter, any other comments for my next question?
Well, I guess building on what Raj was saying, it is a game-changing scenario that we're faced with. And I think one of the stumbling blocks in our experience has been what are the working methods? Like, is there a guide for that? And I think we're lacking that in Canada. Again, it goes back to what you were pointing out about the JCTs from UK, and in the States, the AIA is very much at the forefront of drawing up the sort of protocols that the partners should have to work together in this collaborative environment. A lot of people are still very risk averse about being drawn into these collaborative environments. They see it as extra work. They're not sure. Are they exposing themselves to more liability? In working to that level of detail that's necessary to make it truly effective. I think we're slowly getting there. I know the IBC has recently issued some templates. They all seem to be based on the stuff coming out of the States. Slowly, it's happening, but I think that's something that needs to be worked on to allow the industry to move ahead.
I find it strange that we sometimes buildings, as in the Vancouver paper recently, all the new LEED towers paying 2-3% premium on your capital construction, they don't hit targets and it's somehow accepted. I don't understand as a consumer, and so I wonder, how do we quantify the impact as a result of hitting or missing targets? Michael?
Well, I think building off one of the earlier points, and a theme today is the people aspect and the change management aspect. And you have all these new sophisticated tools to run these buildings smarter and to get all these benefits from implementing all these things. But if the people aren't adequately trained, if there's not the support there to help them get there, that's a huge gap. And you can't just put in all this new technology and expect someone who's been doing things completely differently for the last 30 years to completely adopt all this new stuff without, appropriate change management and the training and the tools, because that's, I think, where the gap comes in a lot of the times in the implementation stage.
That's brilliant. The next question I had is recognizing that capital and operational budgets and teams and cultures often so different and often miles apart, even if they sit one office down the road, right? So let's play on that a bit with a change. Capital versus operational. To bridge those gaps, if I may, there's financial performance, there's a number of opportunities here. Is it training alone that you think would bridge that? And again, I'd like to open up, and maybe Raj, I can start with you here. To bridge capital and operational, thinking life cycle, thinking information management, right? What do you think is that catalyst for change to bring these two teams together that often aren't working together?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good one. I'd say we've all kind of made that point, which is collaborative design. Ultimately, it really boils down to that. But the change aspect of looking at that full life cycle, it is a combination of the education piece. But what are you educating on? It's really, to me, it's getting to the value proposition. What is the value of bringing the capital side and the operational side together? Once you can identify that value and a value that resonates with the audience you're looking at, right? Because for an owner, that message is probably a little different than it is for the contractor, and it's for the designer, and it's for the operator. But right now it is, I should say. When it becomes a consistent message and everybody looks at it from the same lens, which is it's about extending the life of the asset, it's about doing the right thing for our communities, and it's about creating I'll call it a structure or a system. That's a really great word. A system that's really going to be there for the next X amount of time, and it's going to do right by the community. That, to me, is the linchpin of what's going to create that change, but it starts with awareness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. David?
I think the issue is about execution, and we're talking a lot about big concepts, and I agree with them all. But when you listen to everyone, we're really talking about, is it a philosophy? Is it social architecture, really how we establish values we believe in and drive them into the construction industry? And that's a huge question and really complex. And to me, the big question here is, what do we go away with? What do I go back with to Lafarge? And how do I drive this, move the ball forward and in something that I can attack? And that's really the struggle I'm having right now, the next steps.
We're gonna reiterate that question at the end of the day, and I want to jump in on that. We can go out to the pension funds, as I do, and they invest in buildings for 50, and in some cases today, 70-year money. They think of 50 or 70 years, not a couple of years to design and build it, right? And they also recognize that their average dollar, 20 cents of that dollar in a typical commercial space, is on design and build. 80 cents of the dollar is operate and maintain. And yet we've got this chasm between the two. And for me personally, I look at this, that's a call to action here. Because we can come back home and have the financial models, but then you might have an architect that doesn't want to share his BIM files because it may be somewhat litigious, a risk. An engineer, a mechanical and electrical just may have to work together to go through the motions, collaborate all you want with buzzwords, but if we're not doing it, right? We have to address change. We have got to be honest with everybody, and we've got to be better. Michael.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's the finance guys like me that create the problems because of our budgeting cycle. You know, you've got a capital project which gets approved, and you look at the net present value and the cash flows, and you've got a 5-year horizon for it. And then you've got a different group of people in the room who are looking at the annual operating budget and nickel and diming over small amounts here. And you don't realize that that capital project you approved also has 12 additional maintenance resources required to maintain it.
Right.
And that's all of a sudden just dumped into a different group of people who are working on the operating budgets. And it's that breaking down the silos and making sure everyone's aware of the decisions that approving that capital project will then lead to down the road, and justifying that, yeah, you might need those 12 additional operating resources, but that'll definitely cut down on our upfront costs.
Recently, there was a large client, no names here, and they talked about BIM FM. And as they got into the discussion, it was about file extensions, it was about data objects, and it was very technical. They had no alignment between the planning, the capital, and the operating teams. They didn't have people that would even understand how to use a Revit interface when you got into the FM side. And that was, for me personally, it was a trigger moment. We need to surface these discussions. We've got to address the budgeting. We've got to address the procurement, right? We've got to address these fundamentals of how we're going to come together, not just at a philosophical point, but executing, guys like us that build stuff, right? So perfect on that. Helen.
Yeah, well, I guess, you know, we're listening to conversations with very sophisticated end-user clients, and I would offer the perspective of the developer speculative market who, you know, there is no FM. The FM is a strata council or a building management council. Right. And for them, it has to be so simple. And at the same time, you know, as an industry, we're under pressure to deliver these energy-efficient buildings which come bristling with technology that no one without a PhD can handle. So I think that, you know, again, there's a tremendous opportunity using these digital tools to be able to simplify and to come up with a no-brainer building that doesn't require technical expertise and is going to be cheap and affordable, both in terms of capital cost, but also ongoing operations. So I would put out a sort of a call out to those guys to think about them as you discuss the future of buildings.
Simplifying it, getting to a few common measurements of success for everybody.
How do you hand off to a building management council?
Right. Jason?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually echo on that because it's so often we think about a sustainable and environmentally friendly building as a very complex entity. It does not need to be a complex entity, and that's actually what BIM allows us to have as a tool, in that we can actually look and we can model the building. We can actually see how this building is going to be operated, and you know, it allows us to make informed decisions of, you know, if we improve this one function of the building construction, it's going to be this much easier in a building to operate, to maintain, to do all these different things. And that's, if you look at the developer model, yeah, they're not interested in FM, but they are interested in how much more can we sell this building to other people for, right? And how do we actually increase the overall value of this building or the perceived value of this building? And one of those ways is a simple building that has been thought of collaboratively, and it's selling that overall tool. And then when you get into the owner-operator side, somebody, you know, my experience is in airports, it's actually capitalizing what your long-term maintenance costs are, and we're working with one airport right now where they've capitalized their long-term maintenance costs, so we actually have maintenance team at the table during the design process. They've thought about how we can actually reduce the long-term
Perfect.
So,
If I may then, and I'm seeing the clock flashing red here, I want, last question, and appreciating in this question that we all, or there's, I will say, diversity in the types of business models in which we all work today. If there's one thing, playing David on your point of getting execution practical, if there's one thing from the discussions this morning, appreciating we've got more today as well, but one thing from today that each of us will take away to do differently within our own business or with our customers, what would that one thing be that you could see taking away from this morning thus far?
Me first?
Please.
Okay. Measure, metrics. We need to know how we're doing, so benchmark where we're at so that we can show improvement.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that.
For us, obviously, we've talked about metrics, but for us, it's educate. Right now, we're in the infancy of what BIM can do in the supply chain in Lafarge, and it's really getting people, we have some young employees here, just getting people involved and interested to really figure out what the answers are.
And for me, it's that continued breaking down of the silos and trying to speak the same language, whether it's the construction folks, the maintenance folks, the finance folks, or any other departments, to try and get that common understanding.
I think it's informing and working with our clients and just breaking out of this idea of, oh, we're collaborating within the design team and that's enough, and then actually just working with our clients and making them understand what other benefits can happen in the process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That's a good one. I'd say open-mindedness, really. I mean, it really, you go into a job, you go in with a client. At that point, can we break the barriers of a client and a sub and a vendor? Could we go into a job thinking we're all in this together? It's really that. It's that thought process going in. And I agree with everything that everyone has said here. But at the tail end of what we're going to deliver, it's not for just the client. It is for the user of that, whether it's an airport, whether it's a water treatment plant, whether it's a highway. At the end of it, it's for all of us as users, is the way I look at it. And the other thing I would say is, there's a company that just started up a couple of months ago called Moon Express. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. They are looking at, and I'm probably not going to say this right, but they're looking at mining the moon and asteroids around. So if you think out that far ahead, and how are you going to get to that? How are you going to provide projects for that kind of a initiative? That's long-term thinking, right? And it's not going to happen if we're all looking at this thing as a kind of a single lens. It's more than 3 dimensions, let's just put it that way.
Thank you. And I'll answer my own question. It's ensuring that we have every project stakeholder identified up front and ensuring that we document, that we all agree and understand what measurement of success means for every stakeholder. And if we can get that alignment, we will be much more successful as a team. So that's my takeaway to our own organization and to our marketplace. I have to thank you all for this. I have to ask Scott, is it now into lunch mode, or do we have time for questions from the audience?
We probably have time for 1 or 2 very quick questions.
1 or 2 very quick questions. Anybody here in the room would like to ask a question? Okay. On that note, I want to thank you all. I personally have enjoyed this morning very much. Brilliant. So thank you all for your time, respecting all very busy executives and what you do. We're going to go into the lunch time now, and I know that'll be served. And I just want to make a note to the sponsors out there to thank them all for our support to make this happen. And if you have time with lunch and to visit some of the booths and the sponsors out there, and I think some of us will be around, so if any of you want to have time to discuss or debate or ask questions or brainstorm, I think I can speak on all of our behalf that we welcome that opportunity. So we hope this morning's been worth your time so far, and there's more to come this afternoon. Thank you.